Did you get to rest a little bit?
Yes, I did.
Good. It was nice that the owner of El Masri joined us.
Yeah, I read the story.
We're going low tech here. So
Okay.
put that on.
Okay.
And hold it.
Same thing with yours is this one.
Which is who?
You each have your own microphone.
Okay. So this is me.
Yours, yeah. And I guess it's already on.
That one is on.
It is. Okay. Can we not have it on while we're talking?
Turn it off if you want.
So should it be up here a little bit, or?
You can hold it. Oh, you got to read?
Well, it's okay. I mean,
This is what we have set up. He took the boom mic, otherwise we could use that.
no, it's okay. Well, they need to hear more than once, though. I'm sure it shifts for sure. What was I gonna say? Yeah, we'll just take Palestinian time, as they say. وينها؟ وينها؟ نبيل وينها؟
This is Dr. Pappe.
Everyone, please come in, sit down. We're going to enjoy some music while everyone's still coming in, okay? We're going to start a little bit late because we've got everyone still coming in.
Serious?
Oh my god. Oh my god.
great lineup, though, between yesterday, today, and tomorrow. You should reach all the communities in their comfort zone. Yeah, I know. There's some repeats. Many of them are the organizers. That's why. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, Mike Kuntz. Do you want to take a picture for your mom? Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, wow. Awesome. Have you been to the museum in Vienna? Yeah. So I'm gonna move this.
Folks, can we hear it for Todd Ballou, the music director of First UU Detroit? It is so wonderful to see everyone here tonight, all of you gorgeous human beings who showed up and showed out for human rights. You can give yourselves a round of applause for that. Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, my name is Reverend Julie Brock, and I am the minister of this gorgeous church here. And I want to say before we start that I think Dr. Pappe has been amazing because he's been going around to all these different houses of faith and spreading the message of human rights. Today he's speaking here, tomorrow he's speaking at Tahia Synagogue in Ferndale. And the thing is, people keep trying to make this conflict about religion. It is not about religion, but it is a matter of faith. It is a matter of faith that we need to have faith in ourselves as human beings to be able to end all of the conflict and war that is going on. And the only way that we can do that is if we look at each other and see you have dignity and worth as a human being and no less. And we are intrinsically connected. The interesting thing about Unitarian Universalism is we decided long ago that we don't know the name or form of God. So when I went to seminary, I had to learn the wisdom of all the world's traditions. And here's the thing that I know. All of the gods believe in human rights. I'm glad that you're here today. And I'd like to start our program by lighting a chalice. Unitarian Universalists light a chalice to begin all of our services. It's basically a candle in a cup. And it started in the 1940s when the UU Service Committee was protecting Jewish families during the Holocaust. They would put a candle in a cup in a window to let families know where they could take refuge. So here tonight, I want to light a beacon. I want to light a beacon so all know that there are people who will welcome them into sanctuary. Sanctuary, it was meant to be, a place that is safe, where your human dignity will be upheld, regardless of what you believe or who you love or what identities you hold. Tonight, let us light a candle in a cup, a beacon, a chalice, for all that we hope and hold dear for this world. I've got a few people to thank before we get started. First of all, I want to say that this entire event wouldn't happen without UU Detroit Social Justice Chair, Susan Matthews. She's sitting right over there. If you ever think one person can't make a difference, you haven't met Susan Matthews. I want to thank the Al Nadwa Network for bringing Dr. Pappe here. I want to thank Ali Iblast from Aladdin Restaurant in Lansing. There's gorgeous food afterwards, and Ali donated all of this food, so if you're ever in Lansing, I want to thank Muesli Sweets because, you know, we need bread and roses, right? So there's some sweets out there as well. We're going to have a reception and a Q&A with Dr. Pappe afterwards. I want to thank Barbara Bearfield and Nabil Seder from Jewish Voice for Peace. We would not be doing this without JVP. Thank you so much. I want to thank the members of First UU and all of the volunteers of this community who set up and made this happen. I also want to do a shout out. BookBeat is here. They've got some good stuff to say. Go buy their stuff. And there will be a donation cash bar afterwards if anybody wants to help with putting on events like this in the future. Thank you so much for being here. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the moderator of the event. One of the reasons that I think Unitarian Universalism is really cool is because Krista Brune grew up UU. She grew up UU right here in this very sanctuary, and she's been doing amazing things with her life ever since. Her mother, Marcia, must have taught her well. Marcia's right there. Krista is an award-winning author, photographer, and culinary artist with a lifelong passion for peace and justice. She is the daughter of the late congregation member Kim Brune, a German immigrant raised under Nazi Germany, who spent his post-war life befriending those his fatherland sought to destroy. And Marcia Brune, who I already pointed out today, who's devoted her life to revitalizing the city of Detroit following the economic devastation post-civil rights era. I've gotten to see some of it. Marcia's pretty cool. Krista holds a bachelor's degree in international studies from the University of Michigan Dearborn, a master's degree from the Center for Middle Eastern and North African Studies at the University of Michigan Ann Arbor, and a doctorate in educational leadership and policy analysis from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So she knows more than me. She studied Spanish, French, Russian, Hebrew, Arabic, though her favorite language is the language of shared humanity. You go, girl. Krista's published her academic work on Palestine, peace, education, and diversity, and led and participated in roundtables on the future of Palestine and Israel. Krista is an active non-Jewish member of Jewish Voice for Peace in Madison and serves as a mentor with We Are Not Numbers to give voice to young Palestinian writers, which was co-founded by the esteemed professor and poet Rafat Al-Ayir, who was killed by an Israeli strike in December. Krista shares her time between her home in Madison, Wisconsin, and her extended family in the village of Al-Jamala near Jenin. She splits her time between her home in Madison, Wisconsin, and among her extended family in Palestine. Welcome, Krista.
Thank you.
Okay, actually, before I introduce our honored guest, Professor Ilan Pappe, we have another guest here with us tonight that we want to hear from, Huwaida Araf, who is just back from the Flotilla. And she is a civil rights attorney and activist, and I think it's really appropriate if we give her the floor. Here you go.
Good evening, everyone. Honestly, I'm a little bit nervous because I didn't prepare anything, and it's not because I don't know what to say, it's because I usually talk too much and you don't want to hear me. I don't want to hear me. I want to hear Dr. Pappe. I'm really honored that he is joining us here. I have read his books, constantly listen to him when he lectures, and I'm so grateful for the scholarship that he has offered and look forward to the day when he is speaking about the project that was Zionism and settler colonialism. But I was asked to briefly give you an update on a project that I've been very involved in, and that is the Freedom Flotilla. Hopefully you have heard about it. We have. It is not new. I have been part of an effort to try to break Israel's illegal siege on Gaza since 2008. Since 2008, we have been sailing to confront and challenge Israel's illegal blockade on Gaza, because that is something that is not challenged, is not talked about. Israel's, the illegality of not just what we're seeing today, and not just of settler colonialism, but of specifically when we speak about Gaza, when we speak about the deliberate starvation that is happening, we hear people, we hear countries talking about concern and sending food and airdropping and the maritime corridor with Cyprus and the United States spending millions of dollars to build a floating pier. I don't know when in history you have had a country airdrop food into a territory that's controlled by its allies. And that's just to distract from the fact that the United States and other countries are not putting pressure on Israel to obviously let food in and other things through the land borders. These are all distractions from the fact that our governments aren't taking the political steps necessary, aren't applying the pressure necessary. So all of this concern that we hear is only lip service. And again, it's not new. It's the fact that we have had decades and decades of these countries led by the United States providing Israel with impunity that has brought us to today, where Israel can be committing a live stream genocide that we are seeing every day, and millions of people are taking. And challenge Israel's blockade, insisting on being able to enter. And Israel launched a military assault, killed 10 of our volunteers, hijacked all of our ships and all of our aid. And even in addition to the 10 people that they killed, one of them was an American citizen that an independent fact-finding commission determined was executed. Executed because of the close range at which he was shot at 5 times in his body. And the United States not only did nothing, but when that report came before the UN Human Rights Council, the United States was the only country to vote against adopting that report. And the impunity continues. But despite that, and despite the horrors that we are seeing, and the unhinged brutality of Israeli soldiers in Gaza, and the crime upon crime upon crime, and knowing that volunteers have been killed before and are killed today, trying to help Gaza. We had hundreds of people from 40 countries join me in Istanbul, where I recently came from, to get on ships again to go to Gaza. And not in coordination with Israel, but demanding that Israel has no right to stop us. We have 5,500 tons of aid loaded right now on a cargo ship. We have other passenger vessels and hundreds of people ready to get on that ship and say, yes, we're willing to risk our lives to go to Gaza, not just to deliver life-saving aid, but to deliver a bigger message. The Palestinians don't want to live on aid. Israel has no right to control these borders. This is an illegal siege, and we're going to challenge it. And it's not enough for our government to just talk about concern. You have to take action. And it's not because anybody wants to die, right? Nobody wants to die. I have 2 young kids I wanted to come home to. But because we believe that we're not going to let Israel's brutality stop us. And throughout history, whenever you're confronting brutal aggression, whenever you're trying to change for the better, you're going to confront violence. But it's what you do about it. And that is the spirit that we went to Istanbul with. And let me just try to wrap up by telling you what happened. We haven't sailed yet. We were supposed to be sailing, but we haven't yet because not only are governments not supporting us because we're calling them out, but they actually invest time and energy and effort to try to stop us, which is what they did by putting pressure on one of the countries that has flagged our ships so that the day that we were supposed to sail, we were informed that the flags were withdrawn from our ships. And without flags, we can't sail. So we are devastated, obviously, but we're not deterred. It's a minor setback. It's only a big setback, but we're going to treat it as a minor setback. We have been dealing with Israel doing this to us before, and we are working right now diligently to reflag our ships. We have people working on South Africa and Ireland and Latin American countries to ask them to give us their flag so that we can sail. And the people that were in Istanbul from 40 countries went back home to their countries, and they're mobilizing more people because we're going to show Israel that we're going to come back, not just with the hundreds that we had, but double or triple that amount, and not only with the 3 ships that we had, but hopefully even more ships. So we haven't set sail yet, but we will. And if Israel thinks that they stopped us, if the United States and the EU countries that are supporting Israel think they stopped us, they have not, and they will not. They cannot stop our will and determination to see Palestine free, and certainly we can't stop if Palestinians, all that they have been going through for decades, have not stopped. And so hopefully within a few weeks' time, we will be at sea. And when that is, if you want to join us, tell me and I'll tell you how to apply to join us. But joining us is not only being on the ships at sea, it is following us from wherever you are, because all eyes on the flotilla is one of the things that will help keep us safe. So we will sail in a few weeks, inshallah. And let me just end by saying that, again, while we have 5,500 tons of life-saving aid, our actions have never been about aid because, as you know, but we have to keep saying again, Palestinians don't want to live on aid. Palestine is not a charity case. Palestine is a case of a people denied their humanity, denied their freedom, and insisting on the right and resisting erasure. And Palestinians need, want, and deserve freedom, and that is what we are all fighting for. And as devastating as it can get sometimes, seeing that 7 months of a genocide that we have not been able to stop, we know that we are up against big, powerful, money-rich forces trying to stop us, but we also know that we can be stronger than that. If we believe, we don't give up, and we work together, and that's what we're doing. So when we listen today, all of the actions that are happening, from the flotilla to these educational events, to the humanitarian aid that's being organized, to obviously the inspiring work of our students, not just around this country, but around the world. It is these kinds of collective actions that will end this genocide and that will see a free Palestine. But that's if you don't stop with what you're taking here today, right? We got to take that home and work with it and spread it and make sure that we're taking the political action to create the political pressure that will bring about freedom. See, I told you I talked too long. Let me just thank you again for being here and for what you're going to do as we go on. And all of us together, we know we will see a free Palestine. Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
Thank you, Hoida. That was incredible. I have a friend in Madison who also is on the flotilla, Cassandra Dixon.
Yes.
And I was so sad to see her come back to Madison, but she will be joining you again. I want to begin tonight by acknowledging that we're on the ancestral land of once vibrant communities of the Great Lakes, the Odawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwa nations, who call themselves Anishinaabe, the first people. I also ask for a moment of silence for all those who've lost their lives to the systematic subjugation throughout history up to the present. May we all have the courage to stand up, as Hoida just said, to those with the power to draw lines, open frontiers, extract resources, disregard sacred places, sacred spaces, and violate the land and the bodies of those connected to place. May we reflect on atrocities of the past and consider the present genocide unfolding before our eyes and ask ourselves what we are doing to interrupt history. We'll just take a moment. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming tonight, for supporting this incredible tour of Ilan Pappe. I want to just do a little bit of an informal introduction here because Ilan Pappe has affected my life, my work, my trajectory, and I just want to share a little bit about that. Though I now live in Madison, Wisconsin, as Reverend Julie said, I grew up here in Detroit, right in this congregation, and I was always aware of the borders that once confined African Americans to certain areas of the city. I was also aware that I was living on stolen land. I witnessed my mother, Marcia Brune, who sits among us today, devote decades to revitalizing the city, disenfranchised by racism, discrimination, and economic deprivation. And thanks to the deep moral principles of this church, I was instilled with concepts of freedom and justice, eager to do my part to right the wrongs of history in my lifetime. That applies to Palestine as well. When I first went to Jerusalem and Gaza in 1986 as a student of international studies at the height of the Cold War, while studying abroad in my father's divided Germany, where he had served as a child soldier in the Hitler Youth, I visited an American Jewish family who had recently come to Israel through the law of return and enjoyed all the rights and privileges of what Israel calls the only democracy in the Middle East. The contrast could not have been greater when I visited a Palestinian family in Gaza, originally from Jaffa, who were refugees in their own homeland. And they actually remain so to this day. Now forced to flee from one corner of the Gaza Strip to another, as more and more family members are killed or maimed by the daily onslaught of Israeli airstrikes on this outdoor prison. The disconnect then was too great, and it has only been amplified since. I knew right away that the Nakba is the core issue of the Palestinian story, the defining moment when 750,000 Palestinians were systematically dispossessed of their homes, their land, and their livelihood, with a depopulation of 11 cities, numerous towns, and over 500 villages. What our honored guest speaker, Ilan Pappe, would call the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. In his most famous work, more than 5 decades later. That process began following the 1947 UN partition of Palestine, notably while the British were still on the ground, and continued after the establishment of the State of Israel on May 14th, today, 1948, 76 years ago, also my eldest son's birthday. Happy birthday, Canaan, in Madison. The Nakba is part of the collective memory of all Palestinians, regardless of their fragmented status on the ground or around the world. When Israel wiped Palestine off the map, it placed all Palestinians in the shadow of the State of Israel. As my in-laws fled the certain invasion of their village near Jenin in 1948, my mother-in-law gave birth to her eldest son in a cave. Earlier that year, my father-in-law anxiously awaited the promise of the International Harvester tractor that he had ordered earlier that year, delivered to Ilan Pappe's hometown of Haifa, when Ilan was just 5 years old. the first tractor in the village at the time. My extended family was now confined within new borders that cut them off from their fertile Marj ibn Amr lands, thanks to secret agreements of the Rhodes Accords of 1949 between Israel and Jordan, just like the Sykes-Picot Accords of 1916 between Britain and France before them. For my father-in-law, who was a watermelon farmer, that watermelon and sesame harvest was the last, and these new borders, drawn with a green pen that became the green line, would carry that wound forward for the rest of their lives as a cruel front row seat to the cultivation of their lands by newly established Israeli settlements of Ganir. No longer could he sell his watermelon in markets of Beirut and Damascus. Those days of a flourishing regional economy were over, only to be replaced by the confines of an Israeli occupation once Israel took over the rest of historic Palestine in 1947. The Oslo peace process of the 90s tried to reset the clock to 1967, just as the present discourse is trying to reset the clock to October 7th, ignoring the historical context without which, as Ilan Pappe will emphasize, you cannot begin to make sense of the present. Without history, we would miss the fact that Zionism was a political ideology that sought to solve the European problem of anti-Semitism by establishing a Jewish state in Palestine, a plan flawed by design because it ignored the indigenous people who already called Palestine home. Here in the US, we know that story all too well. Though like other nations founded through the framework of colonialism, we have yet to fully reconcile the brutal founding of what has become the most powerful nation on earth. Resistance is a natural response to the dispossession of Palestinians from their homeland, not to mention that it's also protected under international law. We have witnessed everything from the nonviolent direct action of the first Intifada in the 1980s, up to the Great March of Return in 2018, and then on to suicide bombings of the second Intifada, to the Hamas attack on October 7th, all of which were met with state violence by Israel. And yet the most prevalent form of Palestinian resistance is living in spite of the horrific restrictions on life and livelihood, tending to one's olive trees, getting to work and school, building homes even if they are destroyed, getting married, raising a family, all the while imagining a future where Palestinians can live with dignity in their homeland. What we are witnessing today is the dehumanization of Palestinians and criminalization of standing with the Palestinians. The conflation of Judaism with Zionism holds Jews hostage to ethno-nationalism. The weaponization of the Holocaust, coupled with the conflation of criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, only serves to shut down honest debate on answering the question of Palestine, and makes Jews into the victims of a Zionism that emerged following centuries of persecution, culminating in the Holocaust. Ironically, Israel as a safe haven for the Jews has become the most dangerous place on earth for Jews. Though Palestinians have always known their own history because they lived it, it was Ilan Pappe who, through his rigorous research on Israeli archives and deliberate engagement with the personal testimonies of Nakba survivors, challenged the dominant Zionist narrative head on. His work has become foundational to our understanding of Zionism and the Nakba. As a preeminent new Israeli historian, Ilan Pappe documented Israel's deliberate and systematic campaign to dispossess Palestinians of their land. His subsequent work, which comprises 20 books and countless articles, many of which will be available for sale following this talk, highlights the brutality of Israeli occupation, apartheid, and genocide that makes up what we call today the ongoing Nakba. By establishing the European Center for Palestine Studies at the University of Exeter in the UK, where he currently works, he created a safe space for students to explore the history of Palestine and chart their own research agenda. I first crossed paths with Ilan Pappe in 2002 in Madison, when he came to the University of Wisconsin to share his knowledge and research that became his most famous book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. At that time, my husband Nasser and I were advocating for a confederation of Israel and Palestine with mutual friend Ghada Kermi and other prominent individuals among sectors of Palestinian civil society, with the endorsement of the late physician and chief negotiator at the Madrid Peace Conference, Haider Abdel-Shafi, alayhi rahmah. I have followed Ilan Pappe's work ever since, cited him extensively in my own book, Crossing Borders, The Search for Dignity in Palestine, and I'm honored to welcome him here today. Ilan Pappe is a voice of courage among academics, and most importantly, Israelis, who has always been willing to take risks and make sacrifices to speak the truth about Zionism, the events of 1948, and the subsequent decades of subjugation that culminate in the genocidal moment, in this genocidal moment in history. If we do not have the courage to speak frankly as he does, and clearly about how we got to this point, as we witness in student encampments in the US and around the world, we are hiding from the very truth that can set us free. Just as Ilan Pappe has inspired me to set the record straight on Palestine and never leave out the Nakba and the right of return, I hope you too will be motivated to raise your voice so that we can push the pendulum of history toward a future where Palestinians can finally return home to a place where all people between the river and the sea can live with dignity. Please join me in welcoming Ilan Pappe.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for the organizers of the whole 3 lectures, and particularly thank you this evening for those who organized this meeting here. I have 2 big challenges. One is, I know that some of you attended my first lecture, and I don't want to bore you, but that won't be fair to those who didn't attend the first lecture. So I will summarize the main points of my first lecture and try to add something new so that those who attended the lecture yesterday will not fall asleep. The second challenge is this amazing chair, which makes you feel like a king, and you would like to give orders, and at least for 1 hour, feel that you are not an ordinary human being. But I'll get over it. I promise you. The main point I made yesterday was the importance of the historical context for both understanding the events of the last 7 months, and also in order to try and look as clearly as we can into the future. And by looking into the future, as I mentioned yesterday, I meant not only towards the near future, which I'm afraid to say is quite bleak and not very promising, but rather looking also into the more distant future, which I think brings hope for liberation, for freedom, and for a just solution for the Palestine question. So I will try and highlight some of the points which I just summarized briefly yesterday and give more depth into them today. But all in all, the same framework would be kept. I mentioned yesterday that from the very moment the world learned about the Hamas attack on Israel on the 7th of October, quite a few world leaders, notable among them the Secretary General of the United Nations, were very quick to mention to whoever was willing to listen that there was a context to the action, even before people knew exactly what happened, whether the facts were clear. I still think that most of the things that happened in those 7 to 8 hours from the early morning on the 7th of October until the afternoon are still a bit in a haze. I don't think we have a full picture. We cannot trust the Israeli version, that's for sure. I think that it was a very natural reaction of someone like the General Secretary of the United Nations to say that regardless of what he knows or doesn't know that happens on the 7th of October, he is educated enough and knowledgeable enough to understand that this is a kind of action that is typical to an anti-colonialist struggle and situation, where you may have events which are not always easy to digest, maybe could generate some criticism, but all in all, could not be taken out of context if you really want to make sure that events like this are advancing equality, human rights, civil rights, and justice, rather than perpetuating violence and bloodshed. And this context is very important, and it's not surprising that the Israeli reaction to the General Secretary of the United Nations comments that one should understand that what happened did not happen in a vacuum, that there was an historical context to that. It's not surprising that the Israeli reaction was so harsh and immediate, demanding his resignation, calling him an anti-Semite, and actually exerting pressure in some places, in some cases, successful pressure on institutions such as universities, mainstream media outlets, political establishments, not to mention context, as if the word context became a kind of a defamatory entry in our vocabulary. And this is not new, this whole idea that you are not allowed to use the context in order to understand what Israel is doing and what the Palestinians are doing. But I think the particularly demand of Israel and its allies in the last 7 months that we should not talk about the context allows us to bring the context back into the conversation, that we should insist on bringing back the context into the conversation. And I'm sure that many of you know the context, but I think that it will not be useless to mention at least the major points of this context. And I began by talking yesterday on the early emergence of the idea that Palestine actually does not belong to the indigenous people of Palestine. And this was not a Jewish idea. This was an idea of a movement that called itself the Restorationists, which was part of the evangelical churches on both sides of the Atlantic, that saw the return of the Jews to Palestine, as they called it, the return of the Jews to Palestine, as God's will and part of a divine scheme that meant to bring back the Messiah, the resurrection of the dead, the end of time. I won't go into the whole dogma, but it was a powerful dogma. It still is, by the way, a powerful dogma that feeds those we call in this country and other places in the world the Christian Zionists. What is important about this dogma, that it was shared by people with power to influence the fate of the people of Palestine, without anyone among those who lived in Palestine during the emergence of this ideology being aware at all that in high places in the United States or in Britain or in Germany, people were discussing their future without telling them, without consulting them, without taking into account their aspirations, their rights. In many ways, I would say, without taking into account their very existence. This became a more powerful concept with the emergence of what the late Edward Said called Orientalism, when the West, or the global North, as we can call it, became interested in taking over from the Ottoman Empire large areas of the Arab world, including Palestine. And you needed that kind of reduction of who is an Arab, who is a Muslim, who is a Middle Eastern person, in order to continue this debate about the future of Palestine as if the Palestinians don't exist. Because the Orientalists were not only religious people, they were also laymen and secular people. So you suddenly see the gelling of a very powerful alliance that regards Palestine as a trophy, either for ideological reasons, strategic reasons, or theological reasons. And you can see how throughout the 19th century, these ideas began to translate into a strategy, into a proper political program, which meant to take Palestine back to the Western world, incorporate it in the Western world, and by that, if you want, restore the glory of the time of the Crusaders or the time of Christ. And I think that's a very important point, because it's not an ancient idea. It's still a very relevant idea to many people around the world, unfortunately. These ideas influenced the rise of Zionism among the Jews. And I also stressed that yesterday, that for most of the Jews, the idea that their future or their well-being in the future is connected to building a nation-state in Palestine, for most of the Jews throughout the 19th century, this was an alien idea, either because they were religiously opposed to that idea, or because they were looking for a more universal solution for racism that would deal with racism not only as a problem of the Jews, but by anyone else who was deprived because of their race, color, or religion. So a very small minority of Jews were hooked on these ideas that were brought by these powerful non-Jewish groups, and together they formed a global alliance that eventually persuaded Britain, already in 1915, to see Palestine as part of the British Empire, and persuaded Britain that if Palestine would be part of the British Empire, it better be a Jewish Palestine rather than an Arab Palestine. And that was the work of a lobby. This was not something that the British easily accepted. And I think we should understand how early on this lobby began its work, because the longevity of this lobby in this country and in Britain explains its power today. When you are already 100 years lobbying effectively, you can rely on inertia of the politicians to understand what they should do without even investing the same kind of power, intimidation, bribery that you invested in the first place in order to let them accept your interests as their own interests. These ideas became a real strategy on the ground once Britain occupied Palestine in 1918. And the way Britain enabled the Zionist movement to become a classical case of settler colonial movement, namely a movement of Europeans that were themselves victims of persecution, believing that their only salvation is by taking someone else's homeland and getting rid of the people who live there. This was a very important part of the mainstream Zionist ideology, to turn Zionism from a project that seeks solution for anti-Semitism into a displacement and replacement project, displacing the native people and replacing them with the Jewish immigrants who came from Europe. This is why today a lot of scholars rightly say this is not that different from the way the United States was created, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. So we have here a phenomenon that is not particular to the colonization of Palestine, but is different from the others, because even until today, a lot of people deny that this is the right way of framing Zionism. And this is a project that began very late in the day, historically, compared to the other settler colonial movement, which is why there is a different kind of anti-colonialist struggle going on, and this is why this is a project that attracts so much attention from so many people around the world. And the context, the historical, more immediate context of what happened on the 7th of October, and especially the Israeli reaction to what happened on the 7th of October, is a history of 75, I would say even 95 years, by which the political movement of Zionism on the ground in Palestine tries to implement the idea that is at the heart of every settler colonial project we know in the world, which is to eliminate the native population. Now, how you eliminate the native population depends on the historical moment that you try to implement it, on the capacity, on the circumstances. So in the 1920s, when the first act of ethnic cleansing occurred in Palestine, it was very limited. It was limited because the Zionist movement was not very strong, and the British government was still responsible for law and order, but it was quite a successful project given the circumstances. So in the mid-1920s, from two very important areas in Palestine, Wadi Hawaris and Marj ibn Amr, the Zionist movement succeeded in persuading the British to change the law, the land laws, the land regime in Palestine, in order to claim that land that they have bought, usually from absentee landlords in Beirut, was not only theirs, but they did not have to respect the Ottoman custom that because these lands were huge and on them there were villages that were there for 1,000 years, that they had the right to evict these villages. So the first victims of this ethnic cleansing in 1926 were 11 Palestinian villages in Wadi Hawaris and Marj ibn Amr. And what is important, this was done according to a European law of ownership. At that time, it was important for the Zionist movement to say our dispossession of the Palestinians is according to the civilized law of the land regime in Europe. And very soon after that, the Palestinians realized that these immigrants that they have received taught them how to cultivate the land, because they have no idea how to cultivate the land. and received them because they really thought they were poor refugees that needed a sanctuary, a place, safe place. When the Palestinian movement began to resist this kind of methods of taking land through purchase and went on uprisings and so on, this kind of land purchase stopped. And by 1948, and this is important to remember, the Zionist movement was able to purchase less than 6% of Palestine. And this is the moment when the Zionist leadership decided that this kind of method of buying land is not going to work. And they opted for removing by force the Palestinians. So within 1 year, they planned to expel every Palestinian from any part of Palestine that they could take over. So they wanted as much of historical Palestine as possible with as few Palestinians as possible. They did it 3 years after the Holocaust. And that immunized them from even, I would say, criticism from more progressive elements in Europe and the United States that probably would have otherwise felt a bit uncomfortable about this kind of expulsion. But because of what happened in Europe and the way the Zionist diplomacy very cleverly utilized what happened in Europe to almost say, as one of the famous diplomats of the Zionists said, well, we created a small injustice to rectify a much bigger injustice. And that kind of immoral explanation would explain to us why the very few voices that thought that what was happening in Palestine in 1948, the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing, was immoral and should have been contested or at least rebuked. That's why these voices died out very, very quickly, because the Holocaust memory, I should say, was used in order to silence. This is not just an historical chapter. The Holocaust memory is used today to silence us, not allow us to tell what happened. And within that ethnic cleansing of 48, Israel created the Gaza Strip. And it created the Gaza Strip as part of a master plan of how to get rid of the Palestinians. You push them to the north, to Lebanon and Syria. You push them to the east, to Jordan. And they wanted to push them to the south, to Egypt, which will remind you what's happening today in Gaza, that Egypt is ambivalent of how to react to what is surely going to happen, which is a massive, or an attempt to massively ethnic cleanse the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip into the Sinai Peninsula. Israel is trying to persuade Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to build a huge refugee city on the other side of Rafah, offering billions of dollars in order to see whether he would go along with such a program. And they're still ambivalent, the Egyptians. And they were ambivalent in 1948 as well. But they closed the border. They didn't allow one Palestinian refugee to cross into the Sinai. So the Israelis decided, if this is the case, we will give up, in inverted commas, part of Palestine that we wanted, 2% of it to be exact, and we will create it as a huge refugee camp. So they pushed intentionally the Palestinians into that strip that you see today, and created a huge refugee camp already by the end of 1948. And part of that history is connected also to the places that were attacked on the 7th of October by the Hamas. Because these places were built on the ruins of the villages, the last villages that were pushed into the Gaza Strip. So you have a first generation of people in Gaza who not only come from Palestine proper, but quite a few of them come from the areas that are around the Strip. And like the Palestinian refugees inside Israel, that became internal refugees, they could see daily how their former villages is turning into a settlement. If you know the stories of the internal refugees in Israel, people who came from a village like Safuria, they went to a neighborhood in Nazareth and could see every day how their village becomes a Jewish settlement. And it's difficult enough to be a refuge, but to see what's happening to you. And as you know, they try to go back and take back their animals, their crops, and they were shot as terrorists. They already were called as terrorists when they tried to retrieve. And not many people know that in 1949, with the agreement of the Egyptians, the Gaza Strip was shrunk even more. It used to be 350 square kilometers, and Israel demanded another 100 square kilometers for the kibbutzim that it built on the ruins of the Palestinian village, because the land was very fertile. And these movements, by the way, of the Zionist left, the most Zionist left, Mapam, were pressuring the Israeli government to take these lands back and annex them to Israel because of their fertility. So this refugee camp became even more dense in that respect. And in that history, of course, we have a chapter which is usually forgotten, half a year of Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip in 1956, which was very brutal occupation that included an untold massacre in Khan Yunis, that only recently we have discovered the documents, which unfortunately the Israelis have now either destroyed or reclassified, but at the time it was possible to get a lot of information about the brutality of the Israeli occupation on the 6 months that they ruled the Gaza Strip in 56, which also is branded in people's collective memory, not just as Palestinians, but also as people of the Gaza Strip. And then you come to a much longer occupation since 1967, where everything that happens in the West Bank is felt also by the people of the Gaza Strip. And everything that happens in the Gaza Strip is being felt by the Palestinians in the West Bank as well. And that is a history of oppression, and I don't have to give you the whole repertoire of what the Israeli occupation meant, both to the people of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. But we know that most of the people that took part in the operation of the Hamas on the 7th of October were young people. So their main historical context is the memory of their parents and grandparents, but also their own personal experience. And their own personal experience is 17 years of siege, of blockade, of 4 deadly assaults on Gaza, from the air, from the sea, from the land, bombarding civilian areas as if there were military bases, killing many people, wounding many people, and traumatizing a whole population, many of them women and children. And this is a context by which you understand that people in such conditions that remind us of the ghettos of Europe, these kinds of conditions cannot be tolerated by people. And it's not surprising that they will do everything they can to break out of this kind of life. And if people don't want the Palestinians to use violence in order to liberate themselves from such an oppression and brutality, so let them at least allow them the non-violent methods of the boycott, the divestment, and sanctions, and don't turn it into an illegal action when this is the most peaceful, non-violent action that people have at their disposal in order to end that kind of historical context that, if it continues, of course, would breed more violence and more bloodshed. Now, this is more or less what I was talking about yesterday, but I want to say something about the future, which I think is very important. For the near future, you have, unfortunately, still the Israeli position as probably the most important factor, unfortunately, in determining the fate of the people, not only in the Gaza Strip, but also in the West Bank, and also the Palestinian minority inside Israel. So these are millions of Palestinians that their future in the next 2 or 3 years is going to be very much influenced by actions, policies, and decisions by the Israeli government. And that Israeli government or that Israeli political system is quite united, unfortunately, in adopting a dehumanized perception of the Palestinians. At best, and this is not at best at all, it has a pragmatic section, you can call it as such, that might win the next election, might not win the next election, that really believes that the model that it established in the West Bank, the Oslo model, with the Palestinian Authority, with the partition of the West Bank into Area A, B, and C, Area A being supposedly under the rule of a Palestinian Authority, but in practice, of course, it's also under Israeli control. Area B with a joint control of the Palestinian Authority in Israel, and Area C, which is directly controlled by Israel. This is the pragmatic Israel. Pragmatic Israel has a vision of either bringing the Palestinian Authority or a similar body, that would rule the Gaza Strip on behalf of Israel. This is also supported by the State Department and by the European Union as a program. Unfortunately, even countries that are a bit more critical on Israel, such as Russia, China, are going to support this idea as well. And there's additional things that they want to do, these pragmatic Israelis, which is to annex part of the Gaza Strip to Israel, and to encourage as much as possible people to leave the Gaza Strip. The less pragmatic, the more fanatic, which is a powerful force in Israel today, Israeli political forces plan to do something else. They want to restore Jewish settlements, as they call it, to re-Judaize the Gaza Strip, and to inflict a much more massive ethnic cleansing. And the worrying part of it is that they want to transfer this model also to the West Bank. We tended to look at these people as lunatics, as being on the fringe, of being hallucinators, messianic, but they are people with political force in Israel, not just because of their relative success in the last elections in Israel. Much more important is their prominent presence in the Israeli army, in the secret service, in all these strategic elites that make the decision and implement this decision with regard to Israel. As you know, Israel has a force of about 300,000 people that are daily policing the Palestinians. About 300,000 Israelis are engaged on daily policing the Israelis, either monitoring, the Palestinians, either monitoring their conversations or regulating their right to move, to work, to leave the country, to enter the country, decide whether to punish them individually or collectively. This is a huge group of people in terms of numbers, because otherwise you cannot oppress so many people for such a long time. So in these kinds of organizations, the power of a particular version of Zionism, the version that believes that Zionism has the right to implement fully the idea of the ethnic cleansing now in 2024, and doesn't really pay much attention to international opinion on what they are doing is a powerful force to recognize with an ability to impact the lives of all of us who live in historical Palestine and those who are committed to Palestine. Of course, this will not be done without resistance. We don't know yet how would a group like the Hezbollah in Lebanon react to such policies. We don't know how the people in the West Bank would be able to organize themselves in reaction to such policies. We can see that despite everything Israel tells us, the Hamas still resists the Israeli operations in the Gaza Strip. We are very encouraged by the international reaction, at least by the civil society, and we hope that we can accelerate the influence of these groups in the civil society on the governments, on the policymakers, to change their policies towards Israel. I think we all were disappointed with the International Court of Justice in the first round, the way it responded to South Africa's demand to recognize what Israel is doing as a genocide. There are now, as you probably know, South Africa has readdressed the problem to the International Court of Justice once more. I'm not very hopeful about the way the ICJ would react or would react differently, but it's an important landmark, the very fact that they were willing to discuss it, even if the final conclusion was not that promising. But however the next 2 years are going to unfold, and as I said, it seems like this long night of darkness, which I'm sure we all are fighting against with all our might, and we will double and triple our efforts in every way possible to stop it. And that, of course, goes without saying, I think, talking to people here. I think it is also important to see the longer term developments, which are more hopeful, much more hopeful. There are cracks, wide cracks in the building that is called the Zionist Project in Palestine. They are huge, these cracks. And they include the inability of the Israeli Jewish society to cohese, to gel into a nation state as much as they wanted. The whole idea of Judaism as a national identity has totally failed. This has nothing to do with the Palestinians, it just doesn't work. This is now translated into a cold civil war in Israel between two camps of the Jewish society, which implodes the Israeli society from within. This is coupled with a huge economic crisis, with a government that doesn't function, with an army that proved that it can hardly face guerrilla movements. And one wonders whether it can really face a proper army, with an international community, as we mentioned, that is much more willing to consider Israel as a pariah state, and is much more interested in comparing it to apartheid South Africa than to any of the so-called members of the civilized community of nations, as Israel wanted it to do, and with Jewish communities, especially younger generation of Jewish communities, that are jettisoning the idea of Zionism as a relevant factor in the way they define their Judaism. So they're not only showing indifference towards Israel or negate the definition of Judaism that Zionism offers, they're also taking active part in the solidarity movement with the Palestinians. And the fusion of all these processes together, which I call the cracks, will bring the collapse of the Zionist movement. I'm not saying this as wishful thinking. And I'm not saying this as an activist. I really say it as a scholar who has analyzed Israeli and Zionist society for the last 40 years. As a scholar, I'm convinced that I'm witnessing the beginning of the end of the Zionist project. Now, but we are not just onlooker or scholarly analysts of such a process. We should be part of the process. We should contribute to that process because these cracks of the wall, if they don't collapse, if they don't bring down the building is still there. And what is the building? The building is oppression, brutal oppression of the Palestinians, genocide of Palestinians, imprisonment of Palestinians without trial, demolition of houses, discrimination laws against the Palestinians inside Israel, and denying the Palestinians the right of return. So this is a building that as long as it doesn't fall, it is a monument of injustice that victimizes the Palestinians every day. So we have to help to bring it down. And I think that what really motivates me in all these conversations that I'm trying to push forward, that people would replace the conversation about the peace process, the two-state solution that is around the corner, the kissing cousins, you know, all this language that says, oh, there's a peace camp in Israel, there's a peace camp in Palestine. If only the reasonable people on both sides would meet, there will be a solution. In order to get rid of this language, we need to start the conversation about the end of Israel, not just as a slogan in our demonstrations, but as telling everyone who's interested, even those who are afraid of this scenario, to say to them, this is going to happen. Whether you like it, whether you're excited about this idea, or whether you are afraid, and you're entitled to be afraid if you are part of a privileged society, and after more than 120 years of repression, you should be afraid of retribution and revenge. You should be. And you yeah, exactly. And I think you had a taste on the 7th of October, what happens when you treat people the way you treat them. So you should be afraid of such a scenario. But if you are not engaged in this conversation, you will have no input in it. And you can have even an input in this conversation as a Jewish citizen of Israel, if you want to be part of a much better future. A future that is acknowledging, I always call it the 3 A's, the future of the 3 A's. The first A, and this is our job, if at all we are going to succeed with the Israeli society with this, I'm not sure, but definitely we are succeeding when facing the world. The first A is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement. This is highly important. And I think many of us have devoted our lives as academics, as activists, to try and let people acknowledge, first of all, the crime against humanity that was perpetrated by Israel against the Palestinian people, first of all in 1948 and since 1948. We don't want just an acknowledgement to the genocide in Gaza. We want an acknowledgement for the incremental genocide of Gaza that began in 2007, to the ethnic cleansing in 1948 that never ended. In many ways, I think Palestinians have trapped themselves with the term Nakba. Nakba is a bit like a natural disaster. It doesn't have anyone who's responsible. This is not a Nakba. This is a crime against humanity. It's much more powerful than a Nakba. This is a crime. Because in a Nakba, nobody is responsible. In a crime, we know who the criminals are. And we know who are the victims of the crime. So we should call it the crime against the Palestinians, not only the war against Palestine. And I think that this kind of acknowledgement, the first A, is something that should be done through university campuses, and it's not done yet. That's how Palestine should be taught in our universities, in our schools. That's the way the media should talk about Palestine. We're not there yet. We have done a great job. I remember coming to America in 1980, you couldn't mention the word Palestine without being called a terrorist. So we are in a better place. We're in a much better place, but we need even to do more. The second A is accountability. Acknowledgement without accountability is useless. And the only way that I can imagine how people who acknowledge either the crime itself or even complicity in the crime, or even complicity of their parents or their grandparents, I don't care. I mean, we'll have to have fine-tuning for the acknowledgement. Of course, there's a difference when the criminal acknowledges the crime and where someone from the outside, witnesses, acknowledge the crime. But we need the acknowledgement of the crime of everyone. But the accountability is of everyone who has been complicit in the crime itself. And this, of course, begins with the Zionists, but it's not only the Zionists. There are people in the Arab world who are complicit in this crime. There are people in the Muslim world who are complicit in this crime. There are people in the Western world that are complicit. There are people in this country who are complicit in this crime. And accountability is finding the restorative justice that makes the acknowledgement into a new reality. The easiest way to try and begin to talk about it is the right of return of the refugees, of course. A return of the refugees, but it's not only the return of the refugees. It's redistribution of the natural resources. It's building a political regime that the people of Palestine themselves will tell us which they want as a vision for the future, and will tell the Jews who stay in Palestine how they see themselves, how they see them in the future, which was exactly the opposite way as what I used to call the peace orthodoxy in this country looked at Palestine and Israel. They always looked at it as an Israeli problem and that the Palestinians have to react to. So Israel was the one that produced the peace plans and the Palestinians reacted. We want a Palestinian, not peace plan, we want a Palestinian liberation plan, decolonization plan. And in decolonization plan, you also tell the settlers, you tell the settler society how you see them in the future. And they can decide whether they want to go along with this or not to go along with this. Finally, and I think this is important for not just for the Jews of Palestine, because there are other minorities that were not treated that well in the last 10 years, especially in the Mashreq, where Palestine is located. And this is acceptance. Acceptance. I think that despite 120 years of oppression, of brutality, and so on, you would like to accept those who are willing to go through the process of acknowledging and accountability and building a joint future together. Because otherwise, decolonization becomes a violent project that does not produce a better reality, even if it's a more liberated one, as we've seen elsewhere. And I think this is something which is not just relevant to Palestine. It's relevant to all the different communities in Syria and Iraq that really suffered in the last, I don't want to mention all the names, but you know them, who suffered in the last 20 years and was not recognized as legitimate members of that society. And it all goes back to the moment before Zionism arrived in Palestine, when coexistence was not a dirty word invented by American political scientists, but was a genuine way of how people lived, acknowledging each other's communal identity, respecting it, sharing its troubles, rejoicing in its moments of success, showing solidarity. I don't want to romanticize it, I don't want to idealize it, but it was a very different reality. It was a different reality in Palestine, it was a different reality in Lebanon, in Syria, and all, this whole political structure in which Israel thrived will have to change as well as part of this process of acknowledging, being accountable, and accepting. And I really think that the slogan, Palestine should be free from the river to the sea is a very good way of encapsulating this idea, not only for Palestine, but really for the whole people, first of all in the Mashriq, in the Eastern Mediterranean, but also for the Arab world as a whole, which is like a huge ship in a rough sea that is looking for a safe anchor. And I always say to the Israelis, even if you have the best cabin on the Titanic, if it drowns, you will drown with it. And if it will reach a safe haven, you will also benefit from that. Thank you. As you wish. I mean, whatever the organizers plan. Julia. As you wish. I'm easy. Yeah. Okay.
Let's have one more round of applause for Dr. I know you're getting excited for Aladdin food, but I think we're gonna do a Q&A in the other room while we eat and have wine, or fizzy drink if that's what you prefer. But I think we're gonna take one or two questions right now from Dr. Pappe. So, do you want me to bring the microphone in? Sure. What do you want to do?
Yeah, so if you have a question, why don't you walk right up here so that everybody can hear you and see you, and I'll give you the mic, just to give everyone a chance to hear some of these general questions. Here you go. Can you come here and turn to the... Okay, just 3 questions here, and then we're going to go into the other room. Can you come up here and face this way?
How good. The seat of the king. It's not fair.
بلاش يوقع انزل لتحت.
I'm fine. Thank you. I want to ask Dr. Pappe. Yesterday I listened to his sobering expectations, and I thought the movement here in the Jewish community, among the youth, is a strategic breakthrough for development of free Palestine, in that we don't have the unanimity of the Jewish community in the United States in support of Israel and AIPAC. Now, my sensitive question in parallel is the left wing or any progressive movement of comparable ideology or outlook in Israel is almost non-existent. I understand there was a left even stronger, but it has diminished to a point where it is non-existent. My question is, what are the elements that could be pushed within the Israeli society to have that be realized much quicker than what I'm witnessing?
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, you're right. The left, and of course, here we're not just talking about a movement with a social and economic perception, but usually when we talk about the left in Israel, we think about people who would share our ideas about Zionism and Palestine. So let's call them the anti-Zionist in Israel is a better term, because I feel that the left in Israel can be a bit misleading. Zionism always had socialists that believed that Zionism and socialism can go together, which of course they can't. So this movement is hardly existing. That's absolutely true. I do think that it's a dynamic situation because if governments would have joined societies and moved from boycott to sanctions, I think that that would increase the number, not dramatically, but it would increase the number of anti-Zionist Jews inside Israel. I think that the events of the last 7 months, although they do not produce immediately a change, they can have a longer effect. Again, I'm not saying here because I said it, I say it was exactly the opposite. You shouldn't wait for a change within Israel as a precondition for the liberation of Palestine. No, the liberation of Palestine probably would precede, inshallah, the change of the Jewish perception of Zionism inside Israel. It will not be the other way around. But I think what the person who asked the question is right. The more this process progresses, the better. And I think that I can sense some change, but it's not good enough, it's not strong enough. But I really think that the other processes which I described in the end of my talk would also lead to a change within the Jewish society. Not a significant one, but an important one. It takes time to talk, to deprogram people who are indoctrinated from cradle to grave with Zionism. It's not easy. When I moved in 2000 into a new place in Israel, and the local newspaper wrote that people should be careful at night because I moved to the neighborhood. And my wife, who is more clever than I am, said, let's invite people to our living room. They would see who you are because we had children and this was complicated, right? So we opened the living room. Once a week, about 50 kind of middle-class Israeli, mostly European Jews, came to my living room. And for 2 years, I think I did quite a good job with 50 of them. And one of my sons is very good in arithmetics. So he said to me, don't lose hope. I calculated. All you need is 550 years, and your vision of a free Palestine will become real. So this is more or less what I think about the Israeli Zionists. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, so we saw what happened with the Arab Spring. They had a plan to dissolve their governments, but no plan for the day after. So if we're building this, are there historical models for us to build this new vision? How do we do it? What are the tactics? What would you suggest?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought don't think we should call it an Arab Spring. This is a term an American journalist invented. It was Arab, but it was not a spring. I think it's important. I think it's connected. Because what we saw is two elements. One is that decolonizing a country is not decolonizing a people. That's for sure. And this is a lesson that Palestinians, I think, are internalizing now. That is not enough because it's not enough to liberate, to get rid of the occupier if you don't get rid of the occupier in your mind. And we had some great teachers like Franz Fanon about this. But the second thing is that the energy that doesn't have a vehicle to carry it with it creates a vacuum that some other forces can fill, not exactly the forces you want. And it's very difficult to convince young people about the need of organization, of structures, and so on, because rightly so, they're very skeptic about organization because it creates hierarchy and it produces corruption as well. But I think there's something that I hear the younger Palestinian generation of activists are much more aware of it. So I think there is a lesson of history, but there's also a third lesson of history, that, you know, revolutions and decolonizations have moments of success and moments of failure. And it's usually very difficult when you're on the ground to realize whether what you have experienced is such a big setback, or really something that leads for a much better period. So I think also in the Arab world, the revolution there has not ended. Yes, we have counter-revolution. This is expected in history. We have counter-revolution in the Arab world. But that doesn't mean the revolution there would not be reignited. I'm sure it is. But I remember being in Egypt and talking to some of the activists, and I said to them, you hate structures. And I said, you're like people who found a fountain of great sweet water, and you want to bring it to another place, but you hate bottles. So you bring it with your hands, and you're surprised that the water has not arrived at its destination. So if you don't like bottles, use, I don't know, use something else. This is very, very important. And you know, I'm not a Palestinian, and I'm not going to interfere in these discussions. Yeah, okay, I'm ideologically Palestinian, not biological. But I think that it's very important to have the discussion that I hear that there is, whether to renew the PLO, whether to invite Hamas and Jihad to join the PLO, whether to create a new liberation organization. These are questions that are not as exciting as protests and so on, but they're highly, highly important strategically for the future of Palestine. The kind of political vehicles, because we understand that the present political vehicles that carry the Palestinian liberation are not working. Are not working. And the question is it enough to have this positive energy to change without it? And this is a Palestinian question. I have a small story about whether I'm a Palestinian or not. I have a very good Palestinian friend, and she was traveling to Qatar from Ben Gurion Airport. And she was worried that the Israelis will not allow her to attend a conference in Qatar. So she consulted a human rights lawyer, like Michael Stafford, in Israel, whether she will there will be trouble for her in the airport. So he asked her, are there any Jews participating in that conference? And she said, yes, Ilan Pappe. He said, no, I asked about Jews. She got there.
I'm sure she will. They're friends.
They're friends, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Yes, it seems to me that a big obstacle to a dialogue and a discourse, and we're certainly far away from it now, is that Israel's leaders and its people and its supporters in the United States and in the West in general don't recognize the occupation. That is, I heard a foreign minister of Israel say on the air a week ago that we don't call it that. They don't call it an occupation or a military occupation. The word I've heard is the situation, which is indeed very vague. So I think that I'm asking you, how can we bridge that gap so that people, say in the West, stop talking about anti-Semitism and start talking about the occupation?
Yeah, thank you. By the way, I think that I remember talking to people. I remember myself in 63, 64 when I became aware of the situation. In the Galilee, and Professor May would correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember Palestinians in the Galilee talking about the Nakba. They were talking about occupation. And I think that's where it starts. We had, long time ago, we should have used the term occupation for the creation of the State of Israel. This was the al-ihtilal al-asli. This was the first kind of occupation. And we then didn't call it. And with the help of international law, we called it the legal establishment of the state of Israel. And I think that's the original sin. If you're not talking in the church, this is the original sin. This is the original sin of this kind of reference. But I think you're absolutely right. The vocabulary that we are using is something that we should insist on. And it doesn't matter what people tell us. We should insist. We're not talking about peace, we're talking about decolonization, we're not talking about the only democracy in the Middle East, we're talking about the only apartheid state in the Middle East, and we are not talking about an enlightened occupation or a progressive ethnic cleanser or a liberal occupier. We're talking about an ethnic cleanser, occupier, and an oppressor. And the more we insist about these notions, the better.
I'm a little nervous because I'm going to present sort of a different perspective. For years, I turned a blind eye to the situation in Israel and Gaza because it just seems so freaking complicated. With you know, I said I turned a blind. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. I said for years I turned a blind eye to the situation, to Israel and Gaza because it's so freaking complicated and decades of history involved. And gee, what can one person do? Anyway, so now we can't ignore it anymore, those of us who did. And so I've been trying to learn. I really want to learn more about this complex history. What concerns me is there's not just three main parties involved: Israel, the Palestinians, and the US. There's this massive party that I'm not hearing people talk about. I was ignorant. I did not know that Iran, Qatar, Russia, I guess sometimes Syria, sometimes, well, anyway, Venezuela. I mean, there are several states that have been funding and arming Hamas for years, not to take on the mighty Israeli army, you know, they can't, but to continually to embed themselves amongst Palestinians and constantly hear, you know, these incursions, you know, to poke the bear. I'm just going to call it a bear. Poke the monster. And also at the same time, when there were opportunities apparently years ago for the formation of a Palestinian, these same parties blocking that.
What is your question?
I am about to ask my question. Okay. Well, I mean, I get one different perspective here for the evening, okay? So my question is, and why did they block the formation of a Palestinian state, yet keep, you know, having Hamas do the guerrilla warfare? So why are we not talking? And Blinken, when he's trying to get the captives back, the hostages, and trying to negotiate, why is he negotiating with these other countries to get the hostages and to get? So my point is, why are we not hearing about these other parties? Because if we really want to end this, why are we not calling out these puppeteers? Why are we not calling out these puppeteers as well? Okay. You know, why are we not saying boycott Qatar Airlines, boycott this, that, and the other?
Okay, I think I understood. Okay.
Let's allow Ms. Pappe to answer.
Yeah, thank you. I think that first of all, it's not a complicated situation at all. Israel has created a shield of complexity in order to exactly to tell people we are the only one who understands exactly what's happening. So when, ordinary people in the world said, if you came to someone else's homeland and you kick them out and you are still occupying their homeland, this is not complicated. You are the occupier and they are the occupied. You are the colonizer and you are the colonized. Now, all over the world, people who were colonized stage an anti-colonialist war of liberation against the colonization. Palestinians are not different. If someone comes and settles in your homeland, you will fight against them. Now, who are the allies of the colonizer, first of all? It's the United States of America. Every dollar of your tax money goes to the oppression of the Palestinians. Almost every dollar of your taxpayer.
That's
Every country in the West is supporting Israel. India is supporting Israel. So the Palestinians were looking over the years, like every other anti-colonialist movement, to some powers in the world that might help them. And it started with the Soviet Union. It started with the Soviet Union because in some periods, the Soviet Union was willing to help the Palestinians to face what became the strongest military power in the Middle East, representing the strongest military power in the world. That doesn't mean that Palestinians were not aware of violation of human rights in the Soviet Union, but they were also aware that without the Soviet Union, they would be totally destroyed. They didn't have at least some weapons to defend themselves. And that is true about after the end of the Cold War. So those regional powers that support the Palestinians are very small in comparison with what they can offer the Palestinians to the huge military aid that Israel gets from the United States and the West. So yes, Palestinians appreciate the help that they get. Does it mean that you have Palestinians who appreciate everything that is done with the record, let's say, of human rights or civil rights in Iraq or in Qatar? No, no, it doesn't. But the whole narrative that says that the 7th of October is an action by Iran to change the Middle East is an Israeli fabrication. Iran is developing, we have to remember, Iran was willing to sign with the United States a nuclear deal. Who failed the nuclear deal with Iran? Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu came to the house, to the Capitol Hill and succeeded in, with the help of Trump, to change that kind of agreement that would have led at least to some de-escalation in the tension. So this is the reality. Now, if you want to deal, and one should deal, by the way, with the problem of human rights and civil rights in countries such as Iran and Syria, there's definitely a human rights problem there. Don't exclude Israel from this conversation. If you have the proper conversation about violations of human rights, you have to include Israel in it. Now, finally, I don't know where you got the information about Iran foiling the two-state solution.
No, it wasn't just Iran.
No, Israel doesn't want the two-state solution. No, Israel doesn't want it. Israel doesn't want the two-state solution.
My understanding is that some of these other leaders did not want a Palestinian state.
No, that is not true. If some people, including myself, believe that the two-state solution is not a good solution. So you have some people in the Arab world who also believe in a one-state solution. But that's a Palestinian state solution. So I don't know about anyone in the Arab world who doesn't want a Palestinian state. So that's not an issue. So really, I really think that it's very important not to look all the time at the or at Iran and before that about Syria and other places as places that only produce aggression. These are countries that were colonized and attacked by American imperialism again and again, and they are fighting back. And I wish also for them that they would have a better regimes and more equal regimes and so on. But that doesn't change the fact that at least on the question of Palestine, they showed a much higher level of morality than ever the United States.
So I'm seeing that people are getting antsy and needing to get up and move. I want to take a poll of the crowd. Do you want to, these gentlemen have been waiting in line, do you want to take their 2 questions? Yes. Okay, all right, we'll take these 2 questions.
Very much for the lecture. I'm from Doctors Against Genocide, as you can see. And as we are speaking here, you know, kids and women in Gaza are being killed right now. They're being slaughtered. The blood is all over the place. So my question, I have 2 questions, and I'm not going to take that long. I seen you talking about massacres and war crime and all that kind of stuff. You didn't mention genocide. Was that intentional, or it just slipped, you know, and you didn't mention it? Because from what I see, that it is an obvious genocide, and it has been going on since Nakba actually is supposed to be called genocide to start with. The second question is, Israel will be held accountable for this genocide in Gaza. Now the countries are complicit in this genocide. Do you think that they will be held accountable? And does that cause a conflict in the international community? Does that cause a division? And thank you.
Thank you. This is what I did mention. I said not only we should call what's happening now in Gaza and genocide, I said there was an incremental genocide before 2000. So I did mention. You missed that particular sentence, which is fine. As for the international, I think you know this is a big moment for international law. It's a huge moment for international law. And the rest of the world, so to speak, as Stuart Hall used to call it, is looking at both the ICJ and ICC, the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, to see how they would react to what goes on in Gaza. Because already before that, they had very little confidence that these supposedly universal tribunals of international law are really universal. And Palestine was always one of the strongest proof for them that these bodies are not universal. And they think that this is a historical moment for those bodies and jurists who represent international law to show them that they were wrong to think that this is really not a universal body that really judges equally people around the world, but it actually serves the interests of the West and the global North. So I don't want to predict. I don't know. I think they're really debating it. They're really debating it. It's not a coincidence that not one country in the global North would have dared to go to the ICJ and say, we want you to pass a ruling on genocide in Gaza. It's not surprising. Not one, you know, we cannot even imagine even the most progressive country, I don't know, like Norway, when it comes to Palestine, they would do that. They wouldn't dare to do that. So you needed South Africa, and you needed Venezuela and Colombia. You needed them. You needed them. Otherwise, who would go to the ICJ? Now they are in trouble because what do? So Germany immediately said, we're with Israel. Germany was once on the wrong side of history. It wants to be once again on the wrong side of history. That's the problem of the Germans. It's not our problem. It's the problem of Germany. It's very educated people behaving like infantiles in Germany. It's unbelievable what goes on there. But putting that aside, I think it's a moment of truth. Now, I don't know if they will seize that moment. But if they don't, which is possible, this is not over. This is not over. 20, 30 years ago, nobody in the International Court of Justice heard about the indigenous people of America. Now they know about them. They haven't heard about the First Nations in Canada. Now they know about them. They don't do much about that, but they know about them. They know about them. Things sometimes move too slowly, but at least they're moving in the right direction. Thank you.
Hello? Do you mind if I shake your hand?
Not at all. I'm honored. Thank you.
I'm honored to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Dr. Nidal Jabour. Me and my brother Ala and a few other doctors, Palestinian doctors, co-founded a new organization called Doctors Against Genocide. We, the Palestinians, had to do it because the politicians and the world failed us. And we, the doctors, had to do it because also the politicians failed us. So we think it's the time for the doctors to step in and do the work. So thank you, Dr. Pappe. Thank you for all the hard work you do and you have been doing for Palestine. We really appreciate your work. We read all your books. We actually have a conference in Dearborn at the Civic Center on Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. It's called A Century of Genocide on Palestine. It's mostly by the medical community. We have some genocide scholars, also some lawyers. So please, everyone, welcome to attend. You can go on our website, doctorsagainstgenocide.org, to register. Now, my question to Dr. Pappe, I think Dr. Ala mentioned some of it, but we as Palestinians think the genocide started at the first Zionist conference at Basel, 1987. The first minute they said, land with no people for people with no land, they erased our existence. That was the first intent of genocide, erasure of the Palestinian people and putting the plan and the program to get rid of these people by any means possible. Then the British helped them with this and the program of genocide started then. The Nakba, the catastrophe, is not an abstract, as Dr. Pappe mentioned. It is not an incident of war. The product of the Nakba was not an incident of war. It was an all pre-planned crime of genocide by the Zionist entity against the Palestinian people. And when we say the Palestinian people say Nakba was a genocide, then everyone should please accept or at least respect what we feel. We feel it was genocide. We are the one who feel the pain, and we are the one who are going to decide. We are not going to wait for the international community for 20 years from now to say that what's happening in Gaza is genocide. We own this struggle and we make the rulings. What is happening is genocide. It has been a genocide. We have to call it as such. The only reason we have an ongoing Nakba is because, as Dr. Pappe mentioned, acknowledgement, accountability, and acceptance. The Nakba has never been acknowledged. If it has been acknowledged as a genocide, then I think we would have been in a much better situation. They all lied to us, and they said it was a war, one party won, the other party lost, and that's it. No, it was not. It was a pre-programmed, pre-planned genocide. It should have been acknowledged then and treated as such, and the perpetrators should have been held accountable at that time. So the whole international community, the United Nations, the West, the whole international people failed the Palestinians and did not acknowledge our genocide, which is similar to denial of the Holocaust. It is a denial to our genocide, which was committed in 1948. And we demand that, and we really would like all our supporters to start presenting the conflict. It's not a conflict, it's a genocide. As such, use the right language, the right terms, because language matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You want to make one final comment, and then I think we'll head over. There's incredible food waiting for all of us, and we can continue our question and answer period there.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's true that before you eliminate people, you talk about elimination. So definitely, this was a formative period. I think we still have to be careful because there are definitions, legal definition, moral definitions, of genocide that definitely are appropriate for what's happening now. And as Dr. I forgot his name, mentioned, this is a legitimate position as well. I think that ethnic cleansing is also a terrible crime, and that is, to my mind, what happened in 1948, because elimination of the native can be achieved by removing the expelling, massively expelling, by massively killing. So definitely Palestine was genocide, the country. People were not genocided in 1948. They were ethnically cleansed, but that's a huge crime against humanity. But what we are witnessing now is genocide, and the reason is that the ethnic cleansing did not work. Half of the Palestinians remained in Palestine, and many Palestinians remained near Palestine. And when the ethnic cleansing is not working, the perpetrator moves to more brutal, inhumane actions such as genocide. And I think accuracy here is important. We should be accurate, we should know the facts, we should know our definitions. It's good to have a sense of justice, it's good to have a sense of morality, but it's also good to be professional and accurate. Like a doctor should be accurate in their medical treatment, we should be accurate as historians, as professionals, to make sure that we know what we're talking about, because truth is on our side. Really, it is on our side. When it comes to the truth, the Palestinians have very little to lose. Thank you.
Okay, one more real big round of applause for Ilan Pappe. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We appreciate your perspective. Please join us this way. There's an incredible spread of food and more opportunity to engage. There's also a book signing with many of Ilan Pappe's books available. You can get his signature on your book. He can personalize it for you. Please stay. Welcome to come around this way. Follow the line that way. There's a large room with tables, with food and drinks, so please join us. Thank you so much, everyone.
Folks, as you're leaving, how about another round of applause for Krista?
It's a different story. رشيد غير كان وقتها يوم بالليل يوم هذا اجى
فاهمة بس هو عم بيطلع بزنس مثل المحاضرات، يعني انا عملنا له كيس.
نو ما بيطلع بزنس، انت لو الطلب عليه كثير.
فاهمة؟ بيبيع كتب. يعني قديش بده
It's up to you. أنا شخصياً
إذا بتجي لإلي أنا بدفع له عقد.
على القليلة I would say 2000.
يعني أنا صوتوا مش عندي.
قديش صوتوا؟
1500 بالأول 1000 قالوا ما بيسوى.
صوت 1500 is the minimum that I see. 2000 معقول.
طلع لأنه بنعمل له upgrade
Right.
You can pass through this way.
بقدرش إذا بخليني أمرق.
I will move
No, it's okay. I will go down.
أنا رايح. He's gonna move it.
Thank you.
أنا راح أروح بدك.